Leadership Conversation is a monthly conversation which is brought to you by the Leadership Development Committee, which is one of the very many hardworking subcommittees of the International Women's Forum of South Africa. We are joined by the chairperson of the Leadership Development Committee, Ms. Futhi Mtoba. We are also joined by the IWFSA president, Ms. Irene Shanley, who I will be handing over to do the welcoming. And then our session for next month, which we're excited to share, is all around digitalization. We're also looking at how we can get much more involved in the spectrum process and how we get more women involved in terms of accelerating digitization. So for tonight's conversation, over to you, Madam President, to welcome our speakers tonight and then to hand over to the chair of this committee, Ms. Futhi Mtoba.
No, thank you so much, Charmaine. Much appreciation. We must also thank you for pulling all of this together. As we all know, we're on a Cisco WebEx platform for free, facilitated and enabled by none other than Charmaine Hovey, who's a director at Cisco, and we really thank you for doing that. And obviously you an esteemed member of IWF and very active in our leadership subcommittee. So thank you for that and for the welcome as well. And then I'd welcome all our members, our esteemed and beautiful members. I can't see all your your faces, but I'm sure that you all look beautiful like you always do. So welcome to this evening, all of you, our esteemed speakers, our moderators, our leadership committee. A warm, warm welcome to you. We are having our 4th edition of the conversation series, and as Charmaine said, it's a conversation series that are organized by the subcommittee, which is the leadership subcommittee of IWF South Africa, and this happens on a regular basis. And these are the conversations which we're striving to keep all our esteemed members informed of very key developments that affects you. It affects your personal life or professionally or your environment. And we try and do that on a regular basis, so we keep ourselves informed, and if any action comes out of that, then we take that up. So really, I look very, very forward to this evening. Charmaine already indicated to you that the panels, we have the chair of our Leadership Development Committee, and the Leadership Development Committee are responsible for developing the next layer of women leaders. You know, and this committee is chaired by Futhi Mtoba, and she is going to do the introduction. And what we have on our agenda tonight, she will introduce our moderator of the evening. Our moderator is, and she will introduce Dr. Nomonde Mabuya, who's also our esteemed member and the chair of our membership committee. Dr. Nomonde will then introduce the panel members, and she will obviously give a brief introduction of the expertise on the topic. And our topic, as you know, is about the vaccine. So the various speakers we know is going to cover, we have about 3 speakers. They are experts in the field of vaccination. So tonight we will hear everything around governance of the vaccines, how they were rolled out locally and globally. We will hear about the safety aspects of the vaccines, because many of us always wonder, you know, if a vaccine is in a clinic, in a township, and there's no refrigeration or whatever facilities, what happens? You know, is it safe? You know, the type of vaccines that how do we know something is a counterfeit vaccine or not? You know, we will hear more about that. other speakers will cover the issue of the implementation and the rollout program of the vaccines, you know, between government and private sector, and the contributions, you know, of both sides, and where will we go for this. And I would be adding, I mean, there's lots of issues around the ethics around it, the governance, the concerns that people have around, you know, is it safe? You know, a lot of people were saying, you know, like I know in the township, a lot of people say we're not taking the vaccines because there's all rumors and misinformation being spread. Our role around the vaccine, our role is to ensure the speakers will give us the comfort of all of this. We know, but it's our role then to go ensure that within our organizations, in our companies, that people have all the correct information. Now, our moderator, Dr. Nomonde, will ensure that, so if we have any questions, let us put that on the chat room. She will monitor the chat room and share the questions with the speakers as we go around, you know, through the session. And then Futi and Toba, as chair, will then, you know, once we've heard all the speakers, then we will receive some closing remarks and reflections from Futi. So with that, I will then welcome everybody. I'm very, very excited for this evening, and I will and I will be listening very, very carefully. And if there's any questions, I would obviously post them in the chat room. So I'm happy to be here. Very, very welcome to everyone. And I will hand over to Futiam Toba, who will now introduce Dr. Nomonde, our moderator. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Thank you, Madam President, members of IWFSA, our distinct panelists, good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening. It is my distinct honor to introduce our moderator for this conversation this evening. She is our very own Dr. Nomonde Mabuya, who is also a member of IWFSA board, as you've heard, and the chair of the membership committee. Dr. Nomonde Mabuya is the CEO of 60 Health, a health risk management and medical scheme administrator, focusing on corporate medical schemes and market. 360 Health is focused on providing quality health care at an affordable rate to all citizens of this country. She is a former chairman of Health Squared Medical Scheme and Pick It Up. She is a qualified occupational medicine specialist and studied travel medicine, aerospace medicine, also a qualified MBA graduate who passed strategic marketing cum laude. She has developed and implemented workplace health and wellness programs for different South African corporates. She is a medicological expert and a coordinator in the development of the narrative test guidelines, currently used by the Road Accident Fund in assessing victims of road crashes in South Africa. And she used to be the chair of the Health and Professional Council of South Africa's RFA Tribunal Committee. She is one of the contributing occupational medical experts who developed the minimum standard of fitness to perform work in mines to ensure compliance to the Mines Health and Safety Act. This guideline is now being used by the Department of Mineral Energy in South Africa since the 5th of February 2016 and has been gazetted. She brings with her a portfolio of professional activities and diverse skills, knowledge and education lot of experience and leadership quality, which are valuable assets to the success of her own organization and, of course, to us as IWFSA. Dr. Mabuya is a mother of two, Tato, a son who is a qualified chartered accountant, a daughter still studying an honors degree in communication and marketing, and she's married to Abi Molwele, a retired IT specialist. They've been married for 33 years. Members of IWFSA, please welcome our moderator for this evening, Dr. Nomonde Mabuya.
Thank you, Futi. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Charmaine. And a very warm welcome to our esteemed panelists, Professor Glenda Gray, Dr. Tumi, and also Dr. Lunginyati. I will start by introducing the first speaker, and I hope you will enjoy tonight. Today is very special in that we are on day 455 of the lockdown, level 3, and at the same time, Gauteng has almost been declared the epicenter, driving the third wave. As at today, our positivity rate as a province is sitting at about 34.1%. So we are facing a crisis as a province. We all need to be conscious and anxious and really look after ourselves. We should not be moving around and doing all sorts of things. Ladies and gentlemen, I will go straight to our first speaker. And what I will do, I will first introduce Professor Glenda Gray, and she'll go through her presentation. If you've got any questions or comments, there is a chat room. Please post them there. I will share with our panelists once they're finished presenting. So without much further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Glenda Gray is going to be covering aspects of governance around vaccines, how the local program has sort of had its first set of challenges, and also the global program. We all know about the COVAX program, so she will also share some of that. She will also be unpacking some of the requirements, why we are also driving for people to be vaccinated. Let me take this opportunity to introduce who Professor Glenda Gray is. She is a National Research Foundation A1 rated scientist, the current CEO and president of the South African Medical Research Council. She is a qualified pediatrician and a co-founder of the internationally recognized perinatal HIV research unit in Soweto, which is also an affiliate of Wits University. Professor Glenda Gray has a global profile, which includes her role as a core principal investigator of the HIV Vaccine Trials Network, has got also international collaboration, was also involved in some international collaboration on the development of the HIV prevention vaccines. Professor Glenda Gray also has received the highest order of Makumbubia. Her pioneering research work with prevention of mother-to-child transmission is well recognized. Other prestigious accolades include the Nelson Mandela Health and Human Rights Award for the significant contributions in the field of mother-to-child transmission. She was also one of the most influential people in the Times Magazine. Professor Glenda Gray, her qualifications include an MBBCH, a fellowship in pediatrics. She also has 3 honorary doctorates. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Professor Glenda Gray as she walks us through her presentation. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you, Namandi. Good evening, Madam President. It's also nice to say Madam President to another Madam President. And so it's wonderful to be Madam President and distinguished guests, all protocol observed. I'm going to take you through, and I will. It may seem very academic, but I'm going to take you through some of the frameworks for a program. I hope you can. How's my bandwidth? Is it okay? Nomandi?
Yes, it feels
Is
stable.
my
I mean,
bandwidth all right?
Yes, yeah, no,
Yes.
yeah, it's fine. Yes,
I hope you
yes.
can hear me. I assume you
We
can
can,
hear
thank
me.
you, Prof.
Yes, we can hear you very
Are you
well.
able to? Okay, good. Okay. Because my son is downstairs and I think he's using up all my bandwidth. So if there's any problem, just let me know and I'll go and holler and get him to get off the internet. I'm going to just forward my screen. So I'm going to just, I'm sorry, I don't know what's happened to my screen here. It's kind of frozen. Maybe I did share my PowerPoint with the team. Maybe they can just,
Yes.
I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint because it seems to have frozen.
Okay. Akida, you able to assist?
Stop sharing. Okay, sorry, it just seems to have frozen and it might be the bandwidth.
Okay, let me ask Akida.
Would you like me to share?
Yeah, please if you can
Okay.
share. It just seems my bandwidth seems to be a problem. If that's fine. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'll just start the presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the frameworks in developing a program and just talk about some of the values that we should have, but also I'll talk a little bit about the implementation of Sasonki. And I guess on the panel and on the discussion, I can talk about some of our experiences with the side effects and things like that. So I'll just wait for you to share my slides, if that's fine. Are you able to find them? I can try again.
Just give me a moment, please. Just give me a moment.
Okay. I can try again if you want.
No need. I think we all have the same problem, so no need. I'm getting there.
Thanks.
Thank you, Akida.
Thanks. Okay, great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So if you can put it into PowerPoint mode, into the full frame mode, that would be great, so that everyone can see it. Okay, great. Okay, if you can go on to the next slide. Thanks. So I wanted to just start off by saying that Africa will require about 1.5 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines to achieve herd immunity for its population in order to control the pandemic. These doses will have to be procured, allocated and delivered to the target populations, and each of these steps pose its own challenges and requires a strategic approach, as we've even seen in South Africa. Also, what we've seen in South Africa, that global inequalities in vaccine access could translate in delays in getting vaccine rollout in Africa. And that has its own challenges and maybe sometimes blessings, because as the virus evolves and we see variants of concerns, we see that there are variable impacts on vaccine efficacy on different vaccines. So sometimes delays can be good and sometimes delays can be bad. And so it's an important thing to take into account the viral evolution and the issues around vaccine efficacy. So initially, as we've seen in South Africa, when there are limited volumes, difficult decisions on prioritization and fair allocation will have to be made. Can I have the next slide? So this just shows you the amount of doses administered. And you can see quite glaringly that Africa is far behind the rest of the world with vaccine rollout. South Africa in the last couple of weeks has caught up, and we are probably at this moment in time one of the high achieving vaccine rollout sites in Africa, but that doesn't mean that we've done very well. But slowly we're managing to improve rollout and access. But this just shows you that that as a continent, we were left behind in terms of our negotiation. A lot of the continent decided to go the COVAX route and put its resources and its money into the COVAX group, which was a global group that sought to procure vaccines on behalf of poor countries and distribute it in that way. And we've seen there have been some issues with it. A lot of Africa, including South Africa, lagged behind because we didn't do any bilateral agreements with pharmaceutical companies. And the bilateral agreements with pharmaceutical companies only came later on in 2021, whereas a lot of the high-income countries' settings had already done their bilateral agreements with manufacturers in 2020. In addition, because a lot of the high middle-income countries had spent their public purse or had given money to the R&D of these vaccines, this guaranteed them early access because they had invested in the R&D of these programs and had done a lot of the risk mitigation. Can I have the next slide? So in terms of vaccination, we always ask what are the benefits of vaccination? And almost certainly everyone always talks about herd immunity. And I think herd immunity comes right at the end. The most important benefits of vaccination is, first of all, is the individual benefit. By being vaccinated, whether you're getting COVID vaccine or getting an influenza vaccine, or you're giving your grandchildren or your children the EPI vaccines, you get individual health benefits because this prevents the individual, the baby, the child, the adult from getting the disease. And so first and foremost, the COVID vaccination will protect the individual who gets the vaccine from severe disease, or reduce your risk of severe disease, hospitalization, death, and will have some impact on asymptomatic infections. But most of all, the COVID vaccine rollout will basically benefit the individual. There will also be public health benefits because rolling out the COVID vaccine means that, particularly if we prioritize the elderly, the people with comorbidities, will impact on health system utilization and will prevent hospital admissions and will relieve the already burdened health system from the kind of crisis we see in Gauteng. So obviously, rolling out vaccines does have public health benefits, and it eases the health system. It also may have impact on transmission, and we've seen some of this data coming out of Israel that before the Delta variant, the rollout of mass immunization did impact on breakthrough infections, but somehow this is being reversed because of the emergence of new variants of concern in Israel. There will be economic benefits as well, because if we vaccinate our taxi drivers, our frontline workers, our pilots, the waitresses, waiters, and people who work in our shops, this will keep the shops open and will minimize the risk of transmission to them. Vaccinating teachers will have educational and academic benefits by vaccinating teachers like we're doing in South Africa. Rolling out the program to teachers will make sure that we can keep our school open and will preserve the academic year. And so sometimes we vaccinate certain groups to do certain things. And certainly by vaccinating the teachers, irrespective of their age, we manage to keep the academic year open. We keep children in school and we keep children getting meals. And so there's huge benefits for that. And then also there's by vaccinating, one could argue by vaccinating businessmen, sports people, people who have to go overseas, and people who have to work towards increasing trade to the country. There are reasons to vaccinate them because this will benefit us for global participation and make sure that we can be still a competitive country. Can I have the next slide? There are lots of people, last year, a lot of people spoke, had a lot of panels and a lot of discussions around rollout of the program and recommended ethical and procedural principles. And obviously the National Academy of Science at the USA, they promoted both ethical and procedural principles, one aiming at maximum benefit, and that was your individual benefit by reducing risk of morbidity and mortality. They also made the comment that of equal concern, that not one person is intrinsically more valuable or worthy of consideration than another, and this is important in terms of equity. They also talked about the mitigation of inequalities and to make sure that vulnerable groups also were considered in terms of the rollout, and then and to make sure that also to address the issue of groups that were important for social and economic costs to both individuals and societies that require consideration. And then obviously there's the issues of procedural principles that they spoke about: fairness, and that there was a legitimacy and public acceptance of allocation criteria, transparency, so that a government would talk about its framework, that it would be evidence-based in terms of who got it, and we had good evidence that whoever got the vaccine, there was efficacy, and also to make sure that we spoke about issues of prioritization, who we should focus on, and also in all elements of the national rollout, would there be exceptions to the rule. Can we have the next slide? The German Ethics Council and the National Academy of Sciences in Germany spoke also about prioritizing people who we could prevent severe cases of COVID. This would be hospitalization and death, and to protect people who had high work-related exposure, and this is obviously healthcare workers and other frontline workers, and also to prevent transmission and protect people who were in situations which made them very vulnerable, so like old age homes or prisons or other institutions like that. And obviously what also was important, that not only should you consider that group of people, but what was essential to maintain state functions in public life, and how do we make sure that while we're rolling out the vaccine, that we make sure that that we maintain the economy, the state function, and public health as public life as we know it. Can we have the next slide? So in terms of these, the MRC together with groups of ethicists and scientists in South Africa developed or proposed a framework guided by the African Indigenous values and principles of Ubuntu, which meant, which has these 4 principles of affirming the humanity of others, addressing the survival of the community, the issue of social solidarity, and what is, and to do this in the importance of meaningful community engagement. Can we have the next slide? And so in terms of affirming the humanity of others, allocations decisions must always have societal benefits and promote common good while respecting human dignity. And every person has equal dignity, worth, and value. Hence, allocation decisions should not be non-discriminatory. And obviously, one should address the issues of ethnicity, nationality, gender, sexual orientation, race, and religion, which shouldn't play a role in allocations, decision allocations. And people should be treated fairly and equally. And allocation decisions should be impartial as much as possible in accordance to fair criteria. Can I have the next slide? Important on the survival of the community, and this is the issue of prioritization. And the overall aim in terms of individual benefit was to address the vulnerable people and to make sure that people who needed the vaccine because they were old or had comorbidities or essential services, or those at greatest risk of illness and death were a priority in the national rollout. Can I have the next slide? In terms of social solidarity, it's important that when we allocate vaccines, we unify communities and we take into account the economic, social, and personal disruptions and hardships that are experienced because of COVID, and that socially vulnerable groups are not left behind in our allocation. Can I have the next slide? And also important to take the public along with you, and the importance of community engagement and communication. That allocation decisions must be rational. The issue of giving healthcare workers first, the issue of vaccinating our teachers, are those rational decisions, and can the public understand that? And obviously, when we deviate from those kind of processes, is that there's engagement, so that people can trust the process that is happening. Community allocation is also important, and it's very important to make sure that decision makers understand the importance of early engagement with stakeholders. And in South Africa, I guess, with the slowness of the vaccine rollout, were we good? Did we take the public with us? Did they believe us? Did we explain why we had the delays? And did they understand the processes that happened with some of the vaccine rollout issues? Then obviously to make sure that decision processes were always fair, ethical, and always transparent, even if there's discussion around ethics, as long as allocations are transparent. Can I have the next slide? In terms of prioritizing, frontline workers, as you all know, are important, and they're instrumental in keeping the society open. And so they are at risk of getting infection and should be one of the priorities of getting vaccine. Obviously, elderly and those with high risk for morbidity, mortality are also important, and we've seen that in our South African rollout. Our essential services are important. Healthcare providers, teachers, workers in food, supply chain, policemen, and those working in transport like taxi drivers. Research participants are also important, because these are the people that participated in research to make sure that vaccines happen, so we mustn't leave them out. Those living in overcrowded areas, in multiple generation homes, even if they weren't over 60, may be important to consider. Issues of young adults. Why are young adults important? Why are university students important? Is because they're important in terms of super spreaders. We saw how the young caused the second wave, and identifying the young people may also impact on transmission and may be important for controlling a pandemic. Pregnant women, we mustn't exclude them. Pregnant women are at high risk of COVID, more adverse COVID outcomes, and we've seen a lot of preterm deliveries and a lot of death in pregnant women who've got COVID, so they become a priority. And obviously, children are important, because if schools are, if we want to keep academic years open, we want to keep schools open, vaccinating children will become a priority. Can we have the next slide? But also important, it's important to have these frameworks, but pragmatism is also important, and is an important value, that there has to be some flexibility in a program. You've got to think on your feet. And we saw this often, when you get to 5 o'clock in the afternoon and you've got 50 doses that have been made and they're going to expire in 2 hours. Do you say, okay, the list says only people over 60, and do you let those doses expire because you're not flexible enough to say, hey, we can't let these doses expire. Let's find people to vaccinate. So that's an important thing. And we often found that with Sasonki, as we got towards the end of the afternoon, we finished our queue. There were 20 vaccines left over. And we get phone calls, what should we do with these vaccines? And the idea is to make sure that these vaccines go into arms. And so it's important for us not to say, okay, well, you shouldn't get this because we can only vaccinate people over 60, or if you don't have diabetes, we're not going to vaccinate you. So you have to be flexible towards the end of the day to make sure your vaccines get into people. And then also in terms of pragmatism, it's no use saying, okay, well, we're only going to vaccinate 60-year-olds, but you have to, you're looking about rural equity. And if you go to one community or one hospital or one school, coming back each time to vaccinate the next group is a waste of time. And so in terms of hospitals, schools or communities, it's important to say, I'd rather vaccinate this village, or I'd rather vaccinate the school, or I'd rather vaccinate this community, irrespective of the age, because I don't want to come back 3 times. I don't want to come back for the over 60s and come back again for the over 40s and come back again for the over 20s and then come back for this and come back for that. It isn't cost effective. And so we also have to be pragmatic about how we saturate communities or hospitals. And we found this in the rural areas, that when we did our vaccination program in the rural areas, if we had an approach where people who worked in the emergency room were first, and people who worked in the ICUs were first, and then come back a second time for people who worked somewhere else and come back a third time, just doesn't make sense. So at the same time, you have to be pragmatic, and that you can't be inflexible, particularly in rural areas where it's more important to saturate the hospital or the school or the community, instead of saying, well, I'm only going to vaccinate people who are over 60, or I'm only going to vaccinate the people that are in the ICU. It doesn't make any sense. So it's important to also be pragmatic, and it's a very important value that we found in the Sisonke rollout. Can I have the next slide? So this just shows you, we started the Sisonke program in the middle of February, and this was a program that was designed to deliver 500,000 doses of the single jab J&J vaccine to healthcare workers in South Africa. And we started off in the urban areas, making sure that we were pragmatic. We started off where we had resources, and those were in the urban areas, and we worked hard to vaccinate people in those urban areas. But very soon we had to start diversifying and getting to more and more rural places in South Africa. And this entailed shipping our vaccines all over the country. And so this is a picture of an aeroplane that's on its way to Kimberley to deliver doses there so that it can go out into Northern Cape. Can I have the next slide? This just shows you also to make sure that in some areas, there's been this talk about the vaccines must go to the people or the people must go to the vaccines. And I would say you need to be pragmatic. In some of our more rural areas, we would bus healthcare workers into central areas to be vaccinated, because we didn't have enough of the resources to go to each hospital. And so rather than going to each hospital, we set up a mega site, and we would then bus people in to be vaccinated. Can I have the next slide? And this just shows you, healthcare workers of all ages and of all demographics waiting to be vaccinated. So this is just a site in the Western Cape where we would be vaccinating healthcare workers, and just showing you the kind of queues that I'm sure all of you are seeing when you go to the vaccination sites. Can I have the next slide? So just in conclusion, I wanted to say that in South Africa, as we see, definitely the demand exceeds the supply, and countries will always face excruciating choices, as we've seen in South Africa. But at the end of the day, I believe that every vaccine in an arm is a step in the right direction. And when we vaccinate someone, that's an important thing. That we have to balance individual, community, societal benefits. And these will always be challenging in our vaccine rollout. And we will also have to have overall principles of vaccine rollout and prioritize groups, but we must also allow for flexibility and pragmatism in this approach. I think that's my last slide.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Prof, for such an insightful presentation. I think one of your opening slides alluded to the fact that just the continent itself, we need 1.5 billion vaccines. We've got a few questions, Prof, from our participants. If I can start maybe with the first two questions. Let me just go to the chat. Just to 1 second, if I can just open it. Right. The first question, Prof, is about people who have mental illness. It comes from our STEAM member. It says, we just want to know, what are the effects of the vaccines on individuals with pre-existing mental health conditions? Has any research been done on this area? That's one. Then the second one, just do them in twos, then I'll come back to the next round. The second one was just around people in rural areas. Why are the doctors, especially that they serve those rural areas, Black doctors and some of all other doctors, they serve different people in rural areas in the townships. Why can't we do mass vaccination using this network to ramp up our vaccination strategy? So those are the first two. I'll come back to the next set of questions.
Okay, so those are great questions. So in terms of people with mental illness, it's very important to know what kind of mental illness they have, and whether it's depression or whether it's epilepsy, seizures, or other kind of issues. So I think the most important thing is for us, when you're getting vaccinated, to know, to let the healthcare provider know what kind of mental illness this is, so that we can then make decisions. So in terms of seizures, obviously, what are the factors that affect people who have epilepsy? And certainly by getting a vaccination, there is reactogenicity, which may involve a high temperature, which may then exacerbate a seizure. And so it's important then to make sure that the person who has the seizure takes Panado before the vaccination. So it's important. So I don't think one must exclude anyone. And certainly people who have got mental health illnesses might be living in institutions. They might be working in places that put them at risk of overcrowding, and the risk of COVID infection may be more detrimental to them than having a vaccination. So I think it's important that we don't exclude anyone. We make sure that if people do have underlying mental health illnesses, that we know what they are, so that we can manage the process very carefully. In terms of the rural areas, I agree with you. At this moment in time, the demand outstrips supply, and so everybody wants that one vaccine that is hardly available. So I think that once the supply issue eases up, we will be able to look at a mass vaccination and look at areas in parts of the country where we vaccinate people. So we've been looking at pension queues. So going to pension queues, setting up mobile units at pension queues, and setting up mobile units in certain key areas where people accumulate, so that we can deliver this kind of mass vaccination. And I think the next phase of the vaccination program will look at these innovative ways and using mobile services and planning in stadiums to deliver a mass vaccination program. And I think we'll see this kind of thing happening once we have more vaccine than we have at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Prof. The next set of questions, the first one is around ethics. It says governance and ethics. Why do we need to be vaccinated if we travel from one country to the next? That's the first question. The second question is, should those who suffer from pre-existing conditions such as asthma, now that their lungs are defective, are they precluded from vaccination? So maybe in a broader sense, they want to know if anybody with a lung condition, are they precluded from taking part in the vaccination program?
So those are great questions. So, I think the ethics and governance around travel, and we're faced with that because, in South Africa, we were faced with businessmen having to go, our ambassadors, our athletes having to go overseas, and they couldn't go and compete because they had to be vaccinated. And so, unfortunately, because we come from South Africa and we have this variant of concern, the beta variant, the B1351, we basically persona non grata at a global level. And so that becomes an imperative for us to vaccinate people so that they can do the job that they have to do. And so, so unfortunately, people will want, particularly people from South Africa, to be vaccinated if they travel overseas. And so it's going to become more and more important to have these vaccinations. In terms of the pre-existing conditions, so it's very important. COVID-19 infection predisposes people with pre-existing conditions to adverse outcomes. And so the job of vaccination is to reduce your risk of adverse outcomes. So if you have a pre-existing condition, for us, that's a condition to be vaccinated. But we always like to work with the person who's been vaccinated and the provider so that we vaccinate you in the safest way. And so what's more important is to work with the healthcare provider to be vaccinated in a safe way rather than to avoid vaccination, because people with asthma, people with comorbidities, hypertension, obesity, diabetes, people with pulmonary embolus and thrombosis are at huge risk of adverse outcomes from COVID-19. And so vaccination is important to protect you, but also we need to vaccinate you in a way that optimizes you don't have adverse side effects from your vaccination. So it's important for us to work with you in this. Remember, billions of vaccines have been given at a global level to many people, old people, people with comorbidities, and although there have been some side effects, it's been to their benefit.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. The last set of questions. The question is, what has stopped us as a continent from creating our own vaccines? I'm assuming we all had equal knowledge about this virus, with initially very little knowledge. The mRNA studies have been going on for years now, and I believe that knowledge became the prototype of the current Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. So what has stopped the continent with 55 countries from producing its own viruses, its own vaccines, sorry?
That's a $1 million question. So you're right, is that we were asleep at the wheel. So we have to, as women in science, we have to make sure that our governments understand that science is not a luxury, and that if you're poor, you need to invest in science. We need manufacturing capability like you see in South Korea, like you see in India. And we need to make sure these kind of vaccine manufacturing need public money. They need public money because we need it for sustainability. We need it not for profits. And so hopefully we've learned our lesson, and hopefully South Africa and Africa will be able to expand its vaccine capability. And South Africa has realized we had very good vaccine manufacturing capability in the past, and we let that go. And I think we still have some of the capability. And having this recent announcement by our president about the mRNA tech transfer, tech transfer, and using BioVac to scale up manufacturing, not only just for COVID, but for future diseases like HIV and TB will be very important for us. But we must make sure that this happens, and we must hold our countries and our governments and our scientists accountable for making sure that we don't let our continent down in the future.
Thank you so much, Prof. I think the last question really is around the J&J vaccine, that initially it was meant to specifically look at the outskirts, the rural areas, because of issues of maintaining the cold chain. So what is the next plan now that we are sitting with the current situation with the J&J? We seem to be only dependent on Pfizer. And so can we maybe just understand how are we going to diversify the needs of the South Africans, because we are still battling to reach even 10% of the members of the public? Over to you, Prof.
Yeah, that's a very important question, and so that's also tells us why we need manufacturing capability. So the J&J vaccine is a single-dose vaccine, and it was developed as an emergency vaccine, and it does reduce reduce the risk of getting severe COVID-19. And South Africa had purchased a lot of the vaccine, and locally we had accepted the tech transfer, and we're doing fill and finish. And then there was a contamination in the Baltimore plant in the US, which caused the FDA to destroy millions of vaccines and to start all over again. And so there's been huge delays on getting the J&J vaccine into the country, and which has necessitated J&J flying vaccines over for the teachers to try and help support the program. And so this is the consequence of not being in control of our own manufacturing, is that we rely on tech transfer. The material we get may have been contaminated, and the importance of making sure that we are independent and sustainable in the future. So hopefully this pressure is going to be relieved, and that more vaccines will become available. But it's important that whatever vaccine we bring into our country, that there's evidence that it works in our variant, and that we continue to do the studies. We've seen some countries like the Seychelles roll out vaccines, and then only to find out that the vaccines that they roll out haven't been effective against their variant. And so it's very important that whatever vaccine we roll out, we know it works in our country. Otherwise, we cost a lot of money and we don't do a good job. So, and we also then cause vaccine hesitancy because there's a lack of trust or faith in our vaccines. So very important questions, but it just shows you as well why we can't rely on other people and why we need to be in control of our own vaccine manufacturing. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Prof. I think that takes me then to the second speaker, who will then touch on the issues of safety around vaccines. The second speaker is going to be mostly sharing with us the role of SAHPRA as a regulator in this space. It's important that as we consume these vaccines, we are given the reassurance that they are also helping us not to be exposed to counterfeit vaccines. The SAHPRA is a very important organization in terms of regulating how we procure these vaccines and making sure that all participants, or at least the public at large, is protected. I will then take this opportunity to introduce the next speaker, which is Dr. Boitumelo Semete Makokotlela. She is the current CEO of the South African Health Products Regulator. She has a PhD in biochemistry, holds an MSc in Management Finance and Investment. She is also a fellow of the African Leadership Initiative. Within the technology innovation space, she was executive director at the CSIR Bioscience. Prior to that, she managed a biotechnology incubator at the Innovation Hub Management Company. She was with McKinsey & Company for 2 years as a McKinsey Leadership Fellow. Prior to that, she was at the CSIR as a senior researcher. She completed her postdoctoral research at the University of Nottingham and EPFL in Switzerland. She has published as a first author and co-author in scientific publications, review articles, and book chapters. She sits on a number of scientific advisory committee and board of directors. She is also involved in a number of thought leadership projects such as the African Union Strategy for Health Research, the East Africa Community Bioeconomic Strategy Development Team with the World Health Organization expert panel on scaling health innovation in Africa. She's also a member of the Ministerial Advisory Committee at the National Department of Health. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. Tumi, who's going to take us on the role of SAHPRA. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Tumi.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to share my screen. I trust that you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can, Dr. Tumi.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, President, for the warm welcome. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here. And I do look forward to the conversation and the very challenging questions that I'm sure will come. I can tell from the ones that we've already had that we have a very engaged audience. Just briefly, before I start, particularly since today we're talking to matters of governance, I just thought I'll reflect on the two very important acts that the work that we do as SAHPRA is anchored around. This is the Medicines and Related Substances Act of 1965, which was recently amended, as well as the Hazardous Substances Act. The Medicines Act speaks to how we should operate in terms of being efficient, effective, and that we should conduct ethical assessment of our work as regulators for all health products as we evaluate whether they meet the defined standards, safety, quality, and performance. Also, it requires that we are transparent, that we are fair, we are objective, and we conduct timeous assessments. Quite important also, it enables us to enter into agreements with other regulatory authorities and also to partner with them, wherein we apply efficient use of our resources to be able to apply what we call reliance on the work that they would have done. The Hazardous Substances Act largely helps us to implement our work in the area of medical devices as well as IVDs. And some of you may have seen some of the work that we've done around COVID-19 test kits, and I'll reflect on those later on in my presentation. But also there are radiation emitting devices like the MRIs, etc., that are under the ambit of SAPRA. So our mandate as SAPRA is quite broad. We don't only regulate human medicines, that would include vaccines and what we call small molecules, but we also regulate medical devices and in vitro diagnostic tests, as I indicated, even those that are radiation emitting. We also regulate the area of veterinary medicines, and we have oversight over clinical trials that are conducted in the country, and also in addition, the area of complementary medicine, and the most recent inclusion being cannabis. So our mandate is really quite broad, and it covers a range of health products. I just thought I'll reflect on where do we come in, and I've tried to keep my presentations short so we can really have more of an engagement. But this is a very generic value chain of health product development, wherein, and I've used this one for, drug development. You would start, with the researchers identifying a certain drug target, and they would screen, and it would be a number of targets that they identify, and they would screen those and find the ones that are more ideal, and they would test those in what we call preclinical studies. So that means that they would be tested in animal models. And that's work that typically takes place in an R&D environment, at a university, at a science council, etc. So I just want to move this. It's done something here. Sorry, something has just cropped up on the middle of my screen. So I just have to, here we go. So our role as a regulator then starts when a health product has then passed, those what we call preclinical studies, and that would be even for a medical device or for a vaccine. And once they then are considered for what we call first in human use or first in man use, the applicant needs to engage with us as a regulator. So we would look at, the design of the clinical trials, and we look at, do they meet the regulatory requirements? So this is for phase 1 trials, which are largely safety trials. And then phase 2, which start to look at efficacy, much smaller numbers than what you would find in a phase 3 efficacy trial. And within phase 3, we also have phase A and phase 3A and phase 3B. And we can even have a phase 4, which I'll talk to. So we look at, so basically all the drugs that are under trial in the country had to go through authorization by SAPRA. We would look at the design of the clinical trials. We would look at the types of questions that, the principal investigators are trying to answer, and we call that the study endpoints. We look at whether these are scientifically sound, and whether the design enables them to address those questions. We also look at the facilities that these clinical trials are conducted. Do the researchers comply with good clinical trial practices? And this is where we go and we inspect the site and we look at compliance. And then we also look at whether the principal investigators have got the adequate training. So again, this is quite important in ensuring that we have that oversight so that the study is properly designed, but also that the participants are protected. And so the study is conducted and we get data that then says the product is safe and the product is effective. And in this case with vaccines, this is the type of data that we would have considered for all of the vaccines that have been submitted to us as a regulator. What then happens is we consider all of this data that speaks to safety and efficacy, but also in addition, we look at the manufacturing of this product. So again, we would inspect the facilities where these products are manufactured. And so when we consider a product for approval, and this again applies to vaccines, we look at, does the data that has been generated through these clinical trials support what the product claims to do? Does it support what it claims when it comes to safety? Are there any contraindications? So that means, other medicines that, they're not supposed to be taken with, will it result in any side effects? And if it does, are those side effects captured? So, for example, if you purchase a medicine, you will find a leaflet inside there, and you will see that there is details that speak to the safety, that talks to these contraindications. We review all of that, and it's then also updated. So, for example, with the vaccines, as Prof. Gray was saying, as we become aware of any adverse side effects associated specifically with the vaccines, we then request that the manufacturers update these patient information leaflets as well as the package inserts. We then also look at, does this product demonstrate the efficacy that it claims that it does have? So we go into detail, we look at the data from the preclinical studies, we look at the data from all of these phases. So you can imagine the volumes of data that we go through. And that's why a process of approving a vaccine takes so long, because there's all of these sets of data we look at. You can imagine the amount of data we look at for the safety, the data that we look at for efficacy, and then the last thing is the quality. We look at where the product is manufactured. Is it a site that complies with good manufacturing practices? And in the event that the product is imported, when it arrives in the country, is it still compliant? Is it still of the quality that we've approved? And, Prof. Gray made reference again to the J&J. I won't repeat, that case that she indicated. And at a time when we do this assessment, the committee could be anything between 20 and 25 experts that we've brought on board as SAPRA to look at that. These are clinicians, in the case of vaccines, these are virologists, these are those who are experts in biological molecules, who are experts in manufacturing. So it's really a diverse team of scientists that come together, and they then help us to make a decision on this. And again, when we register a product, it is valid for a certain period. That means the company that brings it in, as well as the product itself, because we need continuous review and renewal of the application to ensure that there is still compliance with the regulatory requirements. So this is quite a detailed process, and it takes many months, at times even years, because we have to ensure that we get all of this. The last part of this is what we call post-market surveillance. So our work doesn't stop when we've now authorized the product. And in this case, when we authorize the COVID vaccines, we then follow them as they're being rolled out. We look at, are there any adverse side effects? Do we need to update the public on that? Is there any modification that's required on the product? We look at those who are distributing it and selling it, are they complying with good practices? And when the product is imported, as I've indicated, does it still comply with quality requirements? So if I can just touch on some of the development around the COVID vaccines. As you're aware, we had authorized the AstraZeneca vaccine. We've got the Pfizer vaccine as well as the J&J. We're currently reviewing the Sputnik V vaccine, the Sinovac, CoronaVac vaccine, and we've recently received an application for Sinopharm. So those are the three. So you can imagine the amount of resources and time we need if we're currently sitting with these three vaccines, and we have to go through volumes of data on safety, volumes of data on their efficacy, and volumes of data on their quality. It is a very, very detailed process. And very important, as I've indicated, particularly with the vaccines in the context of the variant, this is a key element that we assess. We need data that indicates that these vaccines are effective against the beta variant that is the most dominant variant of concern in the country. And we then do continuous monitoring. And we expect the applicants to also do that because the safety of the public is paramount to us. In addition, we also were involved in authorization of COVID-19 tests, and as I've indicated, clinical trials also. So at the moment, we have about 25 antigen tests that have been authorized, about 44 antibody tests, and 102 PCR tests. And these tests have been validated here locally Again, we were very stringent in how we ensured we authorize tests that we know that will not give us false positives or false negatives, because that is critical for us. And, we're quite comfortable with the feedback that we're getting from the applicants as they do what we call then post-market surveillance on these products, that they still performing, as we had expected. What we also are quite happy about, and we're glad that we were able to support the country and researchers such as Prof. Gray, in that we managed to authorize quite a number of clinical trials. There are currently about 33 COVID-19 trials that are evaluating various therapeutics for COVID-19 as well as antibody therapies. We have one trial looking at convalescent plasma, trial looking at radiotherapy, and 5 trials on vaccines. And this is quite important, for us as a country. If we look at the continent, we were probably one, if not among very few countries in the continent that were able to participate in so many clinical trials, that were able to implement so many clinical trials, and also participate in some of the global studies like the Solidarity study, etc. And we were very intentional as a regulator to say, we want to ensure that we enable, in this case, we're not a barrier. When drugs are to be tested, we would want to support the researchers and the scientists in being able to do that, because once the data is generated locally, it does enable us as a regulator to be able to make decisions a lot quicker, because then the data is available. And also the data is considered with the context, with the South African context in mind. And in this case, the variants. So for example, when the J&J clinical trial started in South Africa, it was during the time that we started to see the beta variant, increasing in the country. So they were able to generate that data earlier than some of the companies that had not conducted the trials in that time or didn't conduct trials in South Africa. So this really speaks to the strength and the stature of our academic and our scientific excellence as a country. And now, while we've had then authorized these, again, it doesn't stop there. You do have those instances wherein there's non-compliance to these acts that I made reference to. So we have to work, very closely, with other stakeholders as we manage and we oversee the products along their life cycle. So in the beginning of the pandemic, we started to work quite actively with SIU. We also worked with the police services, wherein if there were any reports of substandard and falsified products, we could act on that. Our oversight also includes PPE, particularly those that are used in high-risk settings such as hospitals. So we had to authorize some of the masks there, ventilators also fell in here, etc. And so wherein there were instances of falsified products utilized, we had to send our team to investigate those matters. We were quite active in the areas of KZN, in Limpopo, the Northern Cape, Mpumalanga, and Gauteng. And we continue to investigate a number of matters. I mean, we saw really an increase in the amount of falsified products. We also saw, falsified and fake vaccines being brought into the country. Again, we had to act on that. And, there is a mechanism within the Act that enables us to address some of these non-compliances. And these are risky because they pose, serious risk to the public. And so we had to look at quite a range of these. We have a number of cases that have been successfully prosecuted, but also we still have a number that are still under investigation. Some of you may have seen even around the issues of ivermectin, where there were illegal products brought in. In some instances, when these were tested, there was actually other products in there and not ivermectin per se. And that's why it's important to have a strong regulator, because we then are the ones who are gatekeepers. We ensure that the products that are available on the shelves, when you get your, you get them through your script or over the counter, you are certain that if you purchase a paracetamol, it is indeed paracetamol that's there and it's nothing else. And so it is important that we guard really the regulator and regard the type of stringency that it applies. And we really just pride ourselves in having a stringent regulator. This is my last slide to say, even with the medical devices and IVDs, as I've indicated, this is an area that kept us quite busy. We worked very closely with the ports at the OR Tambo International Airport. This was one of our busiest areas. King Shaka also was tended to be busy at times because a lot of products were coming through those ports of entry. And so, we would have to work, 24/7 in essence with the officials there to ensure that any product that is not authorized does not enter the country. We worked, as I've indicated, across the provinces with various stakeholders, such as the police services, such as SARS, the justice cluster, but also we work with the applicants, the companies themselves, to assist us in curbing these. And so with that, I'd just like to end and just conclude to say our oversight and our role as a regulator is along the full product life cycle. And we want to, have the public be confident in the type of stringency, and that as a regulator, we make decisions based on science and we're not influenced by anything, any factor, but the only thing that influences us is science. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
I've got
Dr.
one more slide. Sorry, just one more slide.
okay.
I'd forgotten. Just to wrap up, just key learnings for us. And, I just wanted to say, as we were responding to COVID, there's 4 things that we learned. First, that we had to be open to learning from other regulators. We had to be very agile and have that sense of urgency as data was being generated, literally on a daily basis, and it continues to be. We had to collaborate extensively with various stakeholders. But while we did all of this, we realized that we had to continue to be stringent and ensure that our decisions are science-based. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I think, Dr. Tumi, also what people don't realize is that this new technology, the mRNA technology transfer hub, we also got that tender or that award because of at the back of the strength of our regulator and the capacity that we have as a country with clinical trials. So it's just something that we need to highlight, that really it's a combination of factors that has made South Africa to be chosen to be the actual hub for developing these next set of vaccines. Now, I'm just going to go straight to the questions. We've got a few questions for Dr. Tumi. Let me quickly go to them. The first question that we have is that people are dying despite getting the vaccine. Can we maybe get an explanation of that? Or also, are there any downsides to the vaccine? If we can maybe specifically talk to that. That's the first question. The second question is, in other countries, the US, they are using institutions of higher learning to accredit them as vaccination sites. Why are we not doing the same in South Africa? Because that's really where the big numbers, especially if you think about the student population, where would really ramp up our vaccination strategy. So those are the first 2. I'll come back to the next set of questions. Thank you.
Thank you. On why people are dying. So what we're seeing is, and you may have read quite a number of articles recently, wherein in countries where vaccines have been utilized, we still see what we call breakthrough infections. I think the latest was Israel, there's Chile, there's the Seychelles. So what we know, and maybe Prof. Gray can also assist here, what we know is that these vaccines, they're not cures. So what it does is it prevents, while you can get infected, it prevents you from getting severe disease. And that's what we know about these vaccines. And so we know that even for some of the vaccines, they've got about 100% efficacy of preventing severe disease. So we do expect, and we're working with the research community and with the MRC to develop a national protocol on how we can detect these breakthrough infections, to assess those, and then go back and say, how should these then be addressed? But one will see that you do find these breakthrough infections. In terms of the vaccination sites, unfortunately, I can't address that one because we're not involved in the rollout plans per se. Thank you. I don't know if
Okay.
Prof. Gray wants to speak to why, people are getting infected, etc.
Yeah,
Yes.
so, I think the vaccines reduce the risk, but they don't eliminate the risk. And, there's tremendous exposure. This virus is more infectious than measles and more infectious than influenza. And so, the vaccines will reduce your risk, but they're not going to completely protect you. And as variants emerge, we need to adapt the vaccines. And so we are looking at the Beta variant is circulating in South Africa, but we do think that there's an increase in the Delta or the Indian variant in our country, which may impact on the efficacy. And so we know that they're not going to always put, so vaccines, there will always be breakthrough infections. And what we hope is that on the most that they will help with reducing the risk and help protect us, but they're not going to eliminate the risk completely. And so it doesn't mean you mustn't take the vaccine. It means that the vaccine will protect a lot of people, but there will be breakthrough infections, and there will be reasons why. It's about the risk of exposure. It's about the amount of virus you're exposed to, and it's about the comorbidities that you might have. And so as the viruses evolve, and as we play catch up, we will have to adapt our vaccine regimen to try and make sure that there's broad protection, but there will be still some people that will escape protection, and we're trying to understand all of those comorbidities and factors that happen. And so all in all, vaccines are good, and that they will reduce your risk of having severe disease or hospitalization or death, but they can't eliminate that, particularly as the virus evolves, and particularly as the comorbidities might make you more susceptible. So it's so we're in a difficult situation here, and I think that both in terms of vaccines and therapeutics. So vaccines have leaped ahead of therapeutics, but we do need to also make sure that there are therapeutics that can help us. So we need vaccines to help us, but we also need good therapeutics, monoclonal antibodies and antivirals that can help the vaccine to reduce or control SARS-CoV-2. So this is a hard pandemic, and we need all our tools, and we need to make sure that we adapt our vaccines as the variants emerge, and that some of the vaccines that we thought were good in the beginning may not be good as the virus evolves. So it's a terrible situation that we find ourselves in, because everything is moving so rapidly, and all the time we're playing catch up with this virus.
Thank you so much for those inputs. The next question I have, it says, are there any requirements regarding storage of vaccines in clinics? And mainly because our township clinics, some of them might not have the required refrigeration to keep these vaccines to maintain the cold chain. That's the first one. Then is there anything, maybe organizations such as the IWFSA, is there a role they can play with helping with the accreditation of more vaccination sites, especially at places like taxi ranks, churches, that sort of thing, because there's probably a role of private-public partnerships. So is there a role that organizations like the IWFSA can play in that rollout? Those are my two, and then I'll keep the last two for the next round.
No, thank you. The storage conditions are quite important, because vaccines are biological molecules, and they need to be stored in specific conditions that ensures that their integrity is maintained. And so it is important that whatever the manufacturer indicates as the ideal storage condition that there is compliance with that. You may have seen with the mRNA ones, they need storage at much lower temperatures and like -80. But for a shorter period, you can have them at about between 4 and 8, but you can't keep them there for long. Again, because these are biological molecules. So, and the other thing that happens is that as these are then being regularly assessed and studied, you may have seen wherein we have said we can then extend the shelf life. So these are, are exposed to various conditions to look at their stability at different temperatures, different humidity, different conditions, and for different time frames. And that then enables us to then say, instead of something being having a shelf life of 6 months, we can then now extend it to about 9 months or so. So there's continuous studies taking place there.
All right,
in terms of the vaccination sites, again, I won't be able to, with authority, speak to that. I don't want to, provide incorrect information.
Okay, no, it's fine. We'll also allow maybe Prof. Glenda to come in, or even Dr. Lungi, because she's going to be taking us in the next session on the rollout program itself. Maybe she can also answer that. But let me come to another question that is also pertinent. Part of the NHI is to use GPs for healthcare service delivery. Is there a reason we are not seeing GPs playing a prominent role in this current rollout program of the vaccination? Then the second one is, currently we seem to be heavily dependent on Pfizer as a vaccine. So how are we managing these cold chain issues and the refrigeration matters that we are currently rolling out, especially if you look at areas like our outskirts, the Northern Cape and those kind of places? How are we managing to maintain our cold chain with a vaccine like Pfizer?
So I can answer that if you want, to me.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. So we have a central pharmacy that maintains the vaccine at minus 70 to 80. And so the way South Africa managed it, so there are processes that you have to do. So there's a central pharmacy that keeps the vaccine at minus 70 and transports it. And so when you deliver it to a hospital or a clinic or a vaccine site, you can store it at minus 20 and then you can thaw it. And then you have to use it in a certain period of time. So having a central pharmacy that manages the minus 70 enables us to keep the bulk of the vaccine at the temperature that it needs. And as we move it down the temperature cold chain, we are able to use it in what's required in terms of making sure it doesn't expire. So that's how we're able to move the vaccine into various parts of the country to make sure we maintain the cold chain. So it's the bulk storage that's important. But as you move the various vaccine lots down to the hospitals and the clinics, they're able to use it in a certain time period. And so this is very, there's very stringent criteria applied, and everybody at every vaccination site knows when to use the vaccine in what time. And so when we know and we can guarantee that the vaccines are being used and maintained in terms of the cold chain. So like with the A26 J&J, we stored at minus 20. When we move it into a fridge, we have 28 days to use it. When we take it out of the fridge, we have 6 hours to use it. And it's exactly the same thing with the Pfizer. As you move it down into various temperature stages, you have certain times that you can use it and make sure that we maintain it. So the important thing is to store it at minus 80. But once you activate it to use, you need to use it in the time period as it thaws. And so that's how we can be sure that even when we move the vaccine to various parts of the country in rural areas, that we can maintain the expiration date as it's thawed.
Thank you, Doc. And then the issue of GPs, we don't seem to be seeing a lot of GPs vaccinating. And, is there a reason that we are not seeing their prominence in this vaccine rollout phase? Or are they
Yeah, it's going to come. So there's a whole process to activate vaccine rollout processes. And so what we first of all we have to do is we have to maintain the cold chain. And so we have to make sure that the GPs have generators. So if there's blackouts, they can maintain their fridge. So GPs are important and critical, but we also have to make sure that when we deliver the vaccine to the GP, they can use it in the right time frame, and that there's no expiration of the doses. And so they will come on board. When everyone has to be accredited to be a vaccine provider. And part of the accreditation process is to make sure that they can show us that their generators work, that their fridges work, and that there's compliance in terms of the cold chain. And they're very critical, and we use them at the vaccination sites, and that's very important. So as they get accredited, we can use them more and more. But they're more important to be used at the vaccination centres. So we need GPs, and we need pharmacists, and we need nurses, to help at these mass vaccination sites so that we can vaccinate as many people as possible at these centres.
Okay. No, thank you so much, Prof. It's just to close up on the vaccines. We have people who say, I've had a COVID an infection. Do I still need to go for a vaccine? So is there something called natural immunity? Can we specifically talk about it? The second question would be, if you've had J&J is supposed to be a single dose vaccine, but other people want to go for a second dose, and I think it was also touched on this afternoon with the center that people are going back for second dose. So do you need to go back for a booster dose, and can you use a different, if you've been with J&J, can you go for a second dose using Pfizer? Can we also please just touch on that?
So I'm happy to say that to me if you want, because I'm the clinician. So if you've had COVID yourself, it's good to have a vaccination, and we usually recommend that you be vaccinated 28 days after your last symptom. And the reason why we say that is because you will get the vaccination will increase your breadth of your immune response and will increase the durability of your immune response. We know with primary SARS-CoV-2 infection, eventually your antibodies will wane, and that you could be susceptible to reinfection, which we've seen in healthcare workers and other people in South Africa. So having a vaccine will increase the durability of your immune response. In some countries, if you've had COVID-19, they only recommend one vaccination. And so so in some countries, we've seen that they will give you one more vaccination after you've had a primary COVID infection. So that's an important thing, and we need to follow that up. And if you've had a vaccine and then you get a COVID infection, that's also you will see that you will have an altered immune response to the COVID infection, which will hopefully also for the future increase your durability. So we do recommend, and in terms of the heterologous prime boost, what you're saying, if you've had an age 26, should you get a Pfizer? We do think that having one vaccine and immunizing with another vaccine increases your immune response and durability, but this is still experimental. And we do need more information on mixing, what we call mixing and matching. And so while anecdotally we think it's a good thing to do, and we're busy studying it, it's important for us to be able to give you data that shows that priming with one vaccine and boosting with another increases your durability and increases the magnitude and the breadth of your immune response. And we say this because we have evidence from other infections, but for COVID-19, it's important that we accumulate this information. And so while we might think as experts that this is a good approach, we still need to provide the public and SAHPRA with the evidence that this works.
Thank you so much, Prof. I think that then takes us straight to our third speaker, which is Dr. Lungi Nyati. She will share with us how the implementation of the vaccine rollout plan is currently working, and also the collaboration between government and private sector. If I can just introduce Dr. Lungi Nyati. She is an executive director of MedScheme and Afrocentric. She's a qualified medical doctor from the University of Cape Town and has completed several health economics and public health courses. She has worked extensively as a medical practitioner in private sector and in the public sector in South Africa. She has successfully led the managed care business unit servicing the government employees, GEMS, in MedScheme, and has run the AIDS for AIDS subsidiary of Afrocentric. She now specializes in health risk management for managed care strategy and the aim of reducing the cost of healthcare. Lungi is responsible for ongoing development and enhancement of health risk management strategies within the Afrocentric group. Ladies and gentlemen, let me warmly welcome Dr. Malungelo Nyati to walk us through the next presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Namanda. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you, Lungi.
Awesome. I'll show my face when I'm finished talking to make it easiest. Thank you so much for having me, to the President and to Dr. Namonde. I really appreciate the opportunity. I know that we are pressed for time now, and so I'll go relatively swiftly through this presentation. All right, so I'll speak really about some of the comments about how do you run an effective national program. The speakers before me, Prof Glenda and Dr. Dumi spoke about the COVID itself and the vaccine itself. I'll just speak about the rollout program. And it has been spoken about a lot about what does it take to run a successful national vaccine program. And at the highest level, there are several elements, and I won't speak to all of these because I'll touch on them in brief as we go. The first one is governance, which is the subject of today, and I'll speak about that a bit. Obviously, there are supply chain logistics considerations, policy regulatory matters. How do we resource to be able to vaccinate? The vaccine process and the workforce, and that links a little bit to the conversation about GPs. Dumi spoke about surveillance and monitoring, and there are reporting elements that I'll touch on very briefly. There are obviously technology and information infrastructure requirements. And lastly, and Prof. Gray spoke about this a lot, public engagement and communication, which is probably one of our greatest needs right now. Then, is it moving on your side?
Yes, it did change.
All right. Let me speak briefly about why we need governance in this space. And I think this COVID vaccine rollout, even though it's required lots of flexibility, there are certain elements of governance that are necessary in order to ensure success. The first thing is that we do need a systematic approach in order to achieve equity, which Glenda spoke about a little bit. The very pace that we need to achieve requires a systematic approach. And then for the effectiveness of the rollout, we need to have thought about all the elements because there are many moving parts. There are many interdependencies between the elements, and there's some complexity, especially navigating the healthcare system that we have in our country. Obviously, we need to manage uncertainty, and it is easier to manage uncertainty when you've got some governance principles in place that will guide you in the process. Part of governance is effective risk management, And apart from the risks that were highlighted by Dumi relating to the vaccine itself and fake vaccines, there are risks relating to safe transport of the vaccine, the cold chain that you all asked about, and several other matters. We need governance to be able to be responsive in decision making. Some of the decisions that need to be made at the highest levels. And it is critical that we have some governance that will help us know where do we go for the kind of decisions that are required. We have existing legislation and governance structures that we need to take cognizance of. And for that reason, we do need to take into account those things in order to make an effective program. And then lastly, stakeholder and public management, I couldn't speak even more strongly about. Now, the National Department of Health and Business for South Africa have come together to work really well in being successful in private and public partnerships, and we've seen great successes in how they've worked together. Business for South Africa was put together by the Black Business Council, BUSA, as well as BLS, and they formed this NGO almost of volunteers that have come together to work pro bono to pull together the private sector response supporting the national department. What was done there was that a structure was put together that in some ways mirrors what are the structures in the NDOH, and the two groups of people have worked together. The reason I've put up the slide, and I'll sit on it for a little bit, is to show you because some of the illustrations of the governance elements that are required. There is a three-a-side committee right at the top left that works to get a three-a-side committee that works together with the National COVID Vaccine Response team at National. And these two teams need to solve some of the policy issues that need to be thrashed through and help bubble up to the surface some of the matters that need resolution. This committee is also mirrored with the NETLAC committee and some of the social structures to make sure that there are some conversations that relate to that. One of the great things that came out of the NETLAC conversations was the input on the employer guidance on what to do in terms of vaccination rollout. The NETLAC discussed that at length, and all the social partners gave input into that document, which is now has been gazetted, and it assists workplaces make decisions on what to do about the vaccination of their employers. Things like should vaccination be mandatory were some of the considerations. How do you facilitate an environment that enables workers to be vaccinated were those kinds of considerations that were given there. Then obviously a large chunk of work that's required relates to planning and modeling, and there are cost models, there are site models. All the sites that are registered at the moment are put through into the site model, where at district level, even sub-district level, one is mapping out where the sites are relative to where the population is. And we've been able to see, for example, that there are some districts where there are no sites, no private sector sites at all. And there have been meetings with many of the private players, the CEOs of the healthcare industry, to see how can they respond to areas where there are no sites. And then we can equally see places where there's an overcapacity of sites, so that decisions can be made. How do these come together so that one doesn't have to break up the pack sizes, which is important. Part of the work that was done by the costing and funding work stream related to the administrative fee, the administration fee that was to be paid, the price of the vaccine, and they did a lot of modeling there to see what would be sustainable in the industry. Then there's a whole operationalization group of people, and there's a logistics and distribution team, and this team supports the NDOH with the network planning and tracking. They support the NDOH with setting up distributor accounts by each of the sites, helping order vaccine, all of those elements. The B4SA structures assist the NDOH. There's a team that is assisting with information systems, monitoring and evaluation. And this structure has been really helpful in making sure that all the sites know how to use EVDS, how they work with EVDS, how do they set up EVDS accounts, etc. And then there was a public health and pharmacovigilance and disease surveillance work stream that hasn't kicked in nearly as much as it needs to at this stage, because we're still really in the beginning phases. Perhaps what's received the most attention lately has been the service delivery work streams, and there are 3 of them. The one service delivery work stream looks at health sites, so the pharmacies, GPs, hospitals, travel clinics, and how they are organized to assist them to come to the fore when it comes to service delivery. Then there is a work stream which I lead that looks at employer sites, and that is looking at the way the employers can respond to being a service delivery stream. There are some workplaces that are setting up sites in their workplace to enable vaccination of their employees, and there are many things that have needed to be thrashed through to make those vaccination sites viable. And then there is lastly a service delivery site of setting up mass vaccination sites. And there is a specific definition of mass vaccination sites that separates them from employer sites that may be large as well. And these mass vaccination sites are being worked on together with the NDOH, and the intention is to put them up in areas where the surge capacity is needed. And these sites will then be set up to assist in delivery of those vaccinations. And they'll be both, they'll service both public and private sectors, insured and uninsured. And a lot of work has been done to get them ready. They've been mapped. We know how to service them. We know the kind of clinical staff that you need, etc. I mean, all of that work has been done, and they'll be ready to be kicked off when the time comes. These all were supported by communications, in the communications work stream, a legal work stream. Companies like Weber Wenzel gave some of their time to assist us with some of the legal requirements, and then there was legal support in general. All of these structures were set up using pro bono work across the private sector industry, and it's been phenomenal to see how much time has been given by various organizations, or at least employees of various organizations, to support the rollout. Some of the achievements which have been great is that we currently have over 450 vaccination sites across the public sector, private sector, and some in the workplace, albeit a smaller number. We're currently vaccinating at 89,000 vaccinations per day. The intention is to ramp up over the next 4 weeks to over 200,000 vaccinations per day. We have vaccinated over 2.2 million people who have had their first jab, and second doses are actually going to start this coming week. And everyone's trying to prepare very hard to make sure that we're able to respond to the second doses. And then there's tracking and reporting in place, and there's all kinds of reporting on the number of jabs per site on EVDS. There's reporting on tracking the vaccine doses in the stock vaccine system to make sure that we know exactly where the doses have gone. And then there's some national dashboards so that we can see throughput. Just to tease you on some of the national performance stats, and these are about 2 weeks old, just because there was a delay in getting some of those stats. But as things currently stand, if you look at the over 60 population. Of those that are over 60, 43% at that time had registered. We've seen quite a lot of vaccine hesitancy in these age groups. Even those that are over 60 in the workplace, we've struggled to get many of them registered. But if you combine the healthcare workers and the over 60s eligible population, we have vaccinated just over 37% of this population. What's been interesting to see is what the trends look like in the various provinces. And if you look in blue, the blue bars are the total population per province. The red line shows you the proportion of those people that have been vaccinated. And you can see that the response is different in every province. There are some provinces like Gauteng and KZN that are leading the vaccination program in their provinces of the over 60s. But then you've got provinces like the Northern Cape, Mpumalanga, and the Free State that are struggling. We've had to pivot on the basis of these stats to see whether or not we should change the way vaccines are allocated between the provinces to try and boost some of these vaccinations, because the initial rules were the more people you're able to vaccinate, obviously you need more vaccines. But then by implication, it meant that some of these provinces that were vaccinating slowly would get less vaccines. And so there's been a change in the allocation criteria to enable some of that work. But as you can see, that we are wanting to finish strong together. And so we're working with the various provinces, both private and public sector sides, putting their shoulders to the wheel to make sure that all the provinces improve. Another example of some of the stats that we see is that we've seen that 15% of the Pfizer jabs have been done in the private sector. And this was an interesting stat for us. And there are many reasons for this, and we can discuss them in detail if required. But it came as a surprise to us to see the proportion of people who, although they're insured and have preference to have their vaccinations done in the private sector, for example, in the Western Cape, if you look at the third line, the third row, last column, 42% of people that were vaccinated in the public sector were actually insured. And this was a fascinating stat for us to understand why the case is. And there's a study actually now looking at why that is the situation. In terms of challenges, the path to success is not linear or straight, which we all know, but I learned it in a much fresher way using this through this process. We've had challenges on supply. Obviously, we're currently still supply constrained. The J&J, the need to destroy the J&J vaccines did not help us none at all. And we are expecting that there will be a ramp up of vaccine supply coming in the next 2 weeks. July should look like a very different month to June. Then there have been challenges in terms of site registrations, to the point that Glenda answered about why GPs haven't been enrolled, and even some of the pharmacies haven't come online, was because many people were expecting to be ready for J&J, whose cold chain requirements were not nearly as stringent as Pfizer. And so when we didn't have J&J, it's taken quite a lot for sites to pivot and be able to take Pfizer. There are many advances that have helped in how we deal with the Pfizer vaccine. The other problem with the Pfizer vaccine was that it came in pack sizes of 1,100 doses, which meant that if a site wasn't able to, store these in cold storage of minus 20, you would have had to put those in a fridge at -2 to -8, but then that meant that you needed to consume that 1,100 doses within 5 days. And so if you are not a big site, you wouldn't have been able to use that those pack sizes. And so that slowed down the number of sites that could be registered. We're seeing more and more GPs come to the fore. Many GPs are working together so that they can share a pack size in the same area. And and then more GP sites have been able to come to the fore because of that. As I mentioned, we've seen a lot of vaccine hesitancy, surprisingly more than we anticipated. We saw this with the Sisonke trial. You know, towards the end, healthcare workers decided that they wanted to be vaccinated after the trial had been going on for long. And so we've seen a similar kind of thing with vaccine hesitancy. And so communication requires all hands to be on deck to improve the process. And one of the ways that IWFSA can be involved is really to drive communications across different platforms in different ways, explaining, encouraging registrations. You can come together also in assisting registrations. There are places where registrations are difficult for people, and in every place where it is easy for churches, for example, somebody mentioned churches. If in a church a kiosk can be put up so that people can come to the church and get registered there, that would be really helpful. Then there've been a lot of considerations about allocation of vaccine. I've spoken about an element of this at macro level between the provinces, but then even deciding how do you split the vaccine within the private sector has been an interesting challenge, and we've worked on many different models to assist these, and we're ever improving them. The IT systems in an already fragmented healthcare system have not been easy. We know that the private sector versus the public sector work very differently. Access to IT systems, knowledge of IT systems, phobia of IT systems has been very interesting. So that's one thing. And then readiness of business and policy and agility have been required, and I won't spend long on there. This is my second last slide, and why I'm putting this up to the point of Delta variant is amidst all the successes and amidst all the challenges, we have the very real situation of being inside a third wave. And one of the reasons we did this comparison was because we wanted to see what we need to prepare ourselves for, and medical schemes are wanting to know what they need to prepare themselves for. Now that the vaccine rollout is further away than we anticipated, what do we think may happen in terms of the COVID cases if we indeed do have the Delta variant in growing numbers? You can see here on the left that if you look at India's trajectory in this past wave that they've had, where the Delta variant was discovered, that was their trend line. And if you look at South Africa's trend line here in blue on the left again, you can see it follows India's very closely, which means that if it is true that we will continue along this trajectory that it looks like we're going on, we may very well have a worse third wave than we did a second wave, which we thought was quite severe. But we're watching this closely. So then to close off how we can win together, this pandemic has been a lesson in the inequities of our country. The people who have lost jobs are typically those that are most disenfranchised. The organizations that have suffered are those that are most disenfranchised. The organizations that can respond to vaccinating their workers normally don't have the same kind of resources to be able to set up sites. And so the only way we can win here is together. And partnerships are what are required, both between public and private sectors, between healthcare providers, with business, and with NGOs of different kinds. We need to come together to assist. I really welcomed the suggestion that was made about how IWFSA can assist with setting up sites for vaccination of higher education institutions. We're seeing a few of them come online to prepare to set up sites. They're going through the process now, and it would be great for IWFSA to come alongside them. We obviously need mobilization. Information needs to be correct. Information needs to be spread further. registration needs to be increased, and then assisting with the very equity discussions that we've had. And then lastly, the more reporting we have, the easier it will be to make decisions. I'm going to stop there, Nomande, and take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lungi. I think this presentation really talks to the heart of the actual rollout strategy. And thanks for extending where maybe we can find a place for ourselves as IWF to assist in the rollout. And I think the communication bit, that seems to be where maybe we can help in terms of communicating effectively the correct information to the various sites. You do have just only 2 questions. I think firstly, we are looking forward to the study that you are doing, why people in the Western Cape who are insured prefer to go to the public sector. But maybe part of also the second question is mostly that maybe there are less people who are insured in reality, because most people are not working. So maybe it's probably much easier for them to just also patch up with the public sector. I don't know. It's just a comment that came. But there was a second question specifically. I don't know if you'll be able to give us a specific answer on this one. Why was the second vaccine moved from 21 days to 42 days? Because I think people went, they were initially given 21 days to come back for a booster, but now it's moved to 42 days. So we just want to understand, is that a question? There are no vaccines. What has changed in the booster dose, moving from 21 days to 42 days?
Sure.
I can answer the question.
Yes, thank you so much. I was about to hand it to you anyway.
Okay. So when you're trying to register a product, there's a race to register a product. So you take the closest 21 to 28 days between the first dose and the second dose to get your impact. But as vaccinologists, we know that there's a big importance to delay the prime and the boost. And so the longer you delay your second dose, the better the durability and the immune response is. And so what we have with the Pfizer and the Moderna is that we know that between 21 days and 28 days, we get a great vaccine efficacy. But as vaccinologists, we know that the longer you wait between the prime and the boost, the better and the more durable and the more variable your immune response will be. So at best, the vaccine response will be 90% effective. But if you wait a little bit longer, your vaccine could be even better and more durable. And so in the experience, in trying to accelerate registration, we did move the prime and the boost closer together. But we do know from many vaccines that the longer you wait between the prime and boost, the better it is and the more durable is your immune response. And so it's not about not having enough vaccine in the country. It's about knowing that the spacing is better for our immune response. And so we do need that space. We need that space because it increases memory T cells, and it's good for our immune system. So there was an experience, and I guess if we had more time in the world to wait for a vaccine, we could have done 0 to 21 days, 0 to 28 days, 0 to 46 days, 0 to 60 days, or 0 to 6 months. But we couldn't. We could not do that. And so, please believe me, delaying the second dose is actually good and will help us in the long term.
No,
from other vaccines.
No, thank you. I think that helps. That really helps. Let me take this opportunity to thank our esteemed panelists, and I will hand over to Futhi, who will then give us the closing remarks. Over to you, Sis Futhi. Futhi, you are muted. Sis. Oh.
I'm trying to start my video. Oh, wow.
All right.
You will agree with me that this was really an amazing panel. I would like to thank all our esteemed panel we are left with a lot of issues to think about. You've given us the facts, you have given us insights, and you have given us the knowledge and understanding of what's happening within the space. And you've also given us what the regulatory environment entails and how we should understand that. And you have also challenged us as IWFSA to look at what areas can we create impact. We are the voice of women in business, and we truly appreciate the opportunity to create impact wherever we can. I would not be able to summarize all what you have told us about, because I don't want to really spoil this very informative, insightful, educational presentations that we've had. But just from the snippets, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Glenda Gray, for giving us that framework, which is guided by our African indigenous values and principles of Ubuntu. It's clearly demonstrated in how you are going about with the rollout. There was a lot of impatience from people saying, why don't you give this to business? But then those values would have been lost. You know, the values of affirming the humanity of others, the meaningful community engagement, the prioritization line within that framework, and also that pragmatism of the pragmatism value of the vaccines, roll them out. Dr. Tumi, you really helped us understand the regulatory environment and how efficient that regulatory is. We actually thank you in leading. South Africa is known for being very tight in that regulatory area of medicine, and you have not bowed down to any pressure. We thank you for that, and you've led us to be understood as leaders in this area. Also, just to you, Professor Lungi, we thank you for that, Dr. Nyati, for that call to action for IWFSA regarding how we can encourage people and also to help society in providing the correct information instead of continuously having these what do we call it, fake news, and people not understanding exactly what's happening. I think what is actually important, and I think the lessons for us as a country and for us as IWFSA as leaders, is to understand that the COVID-19 provided us with a real example of what can be done when we collaborate towards achieving an objective. And this was not only at a country level, but at a global level. And I mean, it is very, very pleasing for us as IWFS members to have the players in this important space. So we thank you very much for your participation. To our members, we thank you for joining us this evening. What we would like you to remind you is that we have a series of this conversation. Technology remains one of the biggest issues that we have to face, and we have a series of conversation around that in July. So please watch the space for that, those conversations. Also, I just would like to brag on behalf of the chair of the YLC, our own Trifosa, in that, as you know, that we are moving towards the Paris Conversation on Generation Equality, which is the UN project following the Beijing Plus 25. In that YLC has been registered its commitment in that space, and also we registered the global IWF as for the commitments in the coming years. So with that bragging, I would like to thank everybody for joining us. And then to our moderator, our very own Dr. Nomonde, thank you for keeping this conversation alive and making sure that every question is answered. Thank you, all of you, and to our president for always joining us in this conversation, giving time. You lend the relevant weight that we need in this discussion. From this note, I'd like to thank all of you and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good evening to everybody. Thank you for your participation. Thank you.